Today we're going to be looking at Arctic Fox in the color Cotton Candy Dreams. So first thing you'll probably notice is that my swatches are labeled 1 through 12. I do just want to say that is not synonymous with hair levels. The numbers basically just help us keep track of each swatch throughout the video. My swatches are not virgin hair, which means they've been chemically colored, treated, or bleached at some point in their existences. 1 is pink, 2 is gray, 3 is like a medium toned natural red, 4 is a soft black, and then 4 to 11 is basically a range that goes to a platinum blonde, and then 12 is like a toned version of number 11. So how I do my videos, I will take the dye directly from the container and I will apply it to the very top of each swatch. After that, it is nice, in my opinion, to see what this looks like diluted. Some people do dilute their dyes, so I will do a diluted version at the bottom of each swatch. Please keep in mind, everyone's hair is different, which means everyone's hair can take color differently. Plus, different screens and monitors can make colors look different. I've noticed between my phone and my computer, there's a pretty big difference sometimes. So please just use my video as a reference for how this could possibly turn out for you. So I'll stay home and write these songs, pretend I'll make it someday. My friends are getting married, they're all settling down. So I lay here, watch the ceiling fan go round and round. And it's always gone too fast, like a trip to the beach or the life of James Dean. It kills me to think I'm avoiding the pill I can't swallow. For the diluted section, since this is a pastel, I decided to do equal parts. So that is 1 part of the dye to 1 part diluter. I was actually going to do even less diluter originally because these are pastel. Sometimes if you dilute it too much, it struggles to take to the hair. But when I swatched it, it actually didn't look too much different. So I decided to add another part of the diluter just so that we can get a bigger difference between the direct dye and the diluted portion. Also, if you're unsure, you're not sure what diluter is, my simple answer is that it basically is something that lightens the color of a semi-permanent dye. Some brands like Arctic Fox do sell diluters that you can use, but for all of my videos, I just use a plain white conditioner as my diluter. I'm gonna let these sit for about 2 hours so they can really absorb the color. I will then rinse them out, and when they're dry, I'll meet you back here and we can do some comparisons. I just want to remind everyone that my swatches, again, are not virgin hair. Virgin hair tends to be less porous, which overall can mean that it will struggle to take and hold on to semi-permanent color. The more pigmented a color is, the easier it would be for your hair to absorb it. So things like pastels can definitely struggle. So even though, for example, number 9 took the color for my swatches, if you have number 9 hair before it was dyed, but it's never been dyed before, especially not chemically, it might not turn out like mine. So I just want to give a warning for that. So number 1 was a lighter pink. I'm actually pretty pleased with how that turned out. So the top half looks pretty smooth and consistent, like it covered pretty well. The pink undertone really took out a lot of the warmth that this dye had previously. It's almost like a turquoisey color, I would say, generally, like the dye itself. So over the pink, it's very, very cool. Not quite purple, but it's definitely cooler than it turned out on the rest of the swatches. As for the diluted section, I think because of the pink that's showing through a little bit more, it almost looks a little bit more purpley, but that might just be an illusion because I definitely do see pink. So I'd probably recommend to not dilute this if you're trying to cover a pink, and also try to make sure your pink is as light as possible. The ends that that are a little bit more porous turned a little more blue like the direct dye, but the center part definitely has strands of blue and pink, which if that's what you want, it is very cute. It just didn't cover the pink. 2 was the gray. Overall, I have noticed with pastels and my swatches that if it is not the right combination of situations, it can turn out patchy, especially if a swatch is too dark. And even though you wouldn't think that the gray was too dark or anything, it is a little bit patchy over the direct dye portion. And I want to say I don't notice any patchiness on 11 or 12, so I do think it is the swatch. Maybe it's the hair or just the color it was previously, or even me and how I applied it. But this is why strand tests can be really important. Overall, it might look a touch more cool tone than 11 and 12. I don't see as much green, but it's still pretty turquoisey overall. It might just be a little bit dustier. It's definitely not as cool tone as the number 1 turned out. Interestingly, I don't see much patchiness on the diluted section, but usually the ends are the most porous part of the hair, so that could play a role. So I'm kind of just gonna lump a good chunk of these together. You can probably guess. I would just say, generally speaking, if you have between 3 and 8, I just wouldn't recommend doing this on your hair unless you are truly just going for a slight undertone shift. But even then, again, you can risk it being patchy and maybe not turning out quite how you imagine. I notice especially with a lot of blue dye, unless it's like a super cool undertone dye, it can tend to look pretty green on a lot of swatches. 5, 6, 7, and 8 all have a slightly green undertone on the direct dye portion and the diluted section, I would say, for some of them. 3 is very interesting. I can see like a green trying to come through, but it's also, I think, being canceled out a little bit by the red undertones, so it almost is like a gray green. The diluted section for number 3 doesn't look much different. There's a chance it probably looks a little less red because of the green undertones. They might have canceled each other out a bit, but still looks like a natural red. 4 was the soft black. I don't see a difference on number 4. 5 was like a darker brown. I see a slight difference between the top and the bottom. Like I said, the ends of your hair tend to be some of the most porous sections of the hair shaft. So I see a little bit of green on the very tip of number 5, and then the direct dye portion looks a little bit darker and a little bit like an ashier green than before. I think if you were trying to take out some of the warmth of your hair, I'd probably recommend maybe trying a diluted gray instead maybe. I guess it just depends, but I do see a little bit of that green coming through. And I'm not sure with a pastel if it would even stay. So if you do like the way the top part of number 5 looks, I think I would recommend just diluting a more pigmented dye instead, but you can do whatever you want. 6 was a slightly lighter brown. That one was initially a little bit more warm in undertone than like 5 and 7. So it has a little bit of a similar outcome as number 3, where the top, it almost looks green, but also just dusty and kind of gray. 7 and 8 are interesting because the 7 actually turned out a little bit more saturated than number 8. I do notice that happens a lot with my midtones, and I kind of wonder if that is the color of the strand competing with the color of the dye, but it could also just be the hair swatch, because it often tends to be the 8 swatch I've noticed. Both of those definitely look green on the direct dye portion, and then on the diluted section for both of them there's like a light wash of green. It still looks like a natural color, but like green. It's almost a little like swampy, which I low-key love. So I just worry about the lasting effect if you do like how this looks. It being a pastel, I don't know how long it would stay. And then 9 is where we start to finally kind of come into the intentional color. It is also a little bit warmer in undertone. It's not like a straight up green blue, but if you look at like 11 and 12, these two just have a touch more coolness versus 10 and 9. And then for the diluted section, it's really hard to see, but the 9 diluted is a little bit more patchy than the 10 diluted. So that's why I think it is probably that the swatches are a little bit too dark and they're struggling to take the color. In this case, 11 and 12, I don't really see any patchiness at all. I don't sometimes like to even bring up that it's patchy just because it tends to happen with most of my pastel dyes, but I realize now I probably shouldn't ignore it either. 11, it turned out the lightest. I have been having issues with my 11 swatches where they're not taking the color like they used to. Kind of wonder if that's a factory thing or not. So there is a chance that if your hair is more porous, it could turn out just as dark as 12 and 10. Just probably a little less green than 10. Generally though, I am pretty surprised that my diluted section turned out so pigmented, I guess. These being pastel dyes, I wasn't expecting a lot, but it turned out pretty nice on the ends. So as for comparisons, I thought originally I was going to compare this to Arctic Fox in Periwinkle because that's their other like pastel blue that they have right now, aside from this. But that one is very, very cool tone in comparison. So then I was like, oh, maybe I'll look at the diluted aquamarine, but that one was very green in comparison. And so I kind of landed on Poseidon. This is comparable to number 9. This is comparable to number 10. This is comparable to number 11 and number 12. Overall, it's definitely still more cool in undertone. Poseidon is a pretty cool undertone blue. It's just not as cool as Periwinkle, and it's not as warm as Aquamarine. And when I saw the diluted section for number 11, I was like, oh my goodness, that is quite similar. Now, the thing is when you look at the diluted section for the other swatches, you definitely lose that similarity. I assume the reason that the Poseidon turned out like this on the 11 is because the yellow in the swatch mixing with the blue. But I think it's still helpful to see how warm the cotton candy is now compared to the other blues in the collection. I will post a picture on my Patreon. I'll have it linked in the comments of a comparison between Aquamarine and Periwinkle with the new cotton candy as well, if you're interested in looking at that. The nice thing about Poseidon though is it might be a tiny bit more pigmented than the cotton candy, but only a little bit. I mean, Poseidon's not a pastel, but I've noticed that it's a much more sheer dye compared to Aquamarine. For example, Aquamarine is very, very pigmented, so it could be kind of a good ladder if your hair just needs a little bit more pigmentation than the cotton candy can give you. This color is pretty unique. It definitely leans in that kind of turquoise family, but I felt like a lot of my turquoises were too warm. So I'm gonna compare this to another lighter blue. I think it's still gonna be cooler than this, but that's gonna be Lunar Tides in the color Moonstone. So this is comparable to number 12, 11, 10, and comparable to number 9. Moonstone is another pastel blue, obviously this time from Lunar Tides. I think in jar, Moonstone is cooler. If you look at comparison between 12 and 12, the cotton candy on its own is definitely a little bit warmer. It's also a little bit, tiny bit darker and a little bit more ashy, like dusty in comparison, but most people have warm yellowy tones in their hair, especially when they lighten their hair. So Moonstone can tend to look pretty warm compared to number 12. Because Moonstone is a little bit lighter, it does look lighter on 9 and 10 as well. It does actually kind of seem like the cotton candy might be a tiny bit more pigmented compared to Moonstone, just looking at the diluted section. But I would say as of right now, this is my most similar comparison. So cotton candy is pretty unique. All right, now I'd like to look at the before and after clips. Those, as well as anything past this point in the video, will all be done in natural lighting.
Been to California, never been to LA, so I'll stay home and write these songs, pretend I'll make it someday. My friends are getting married, they're all settling down, so I'll lay here, watch the ceiling fan go round and round. It's always gone too fast, like a trip to the beach or the life of James Dean. And it kills me to think I'm a can't swallow. Haven't seen my twin brother, I keep missing his calls. It's funny just how easily a family can drift apart. I'm finally getting married to an angel in human form, but I still think about Nashville. We're staying here the right call, and it's always gone too fast, like a trip to the beach or the life of James Dean, and it kills me to think I'm avoiding the pill I can't swallow. And it comes, but it won't last. Like you watching your life, waiting for the good part. And what kills me is I've been avoiding the happy ending.
I hope my video helped. If you have a request, I do have a link below to a Google form you can fill out. Just remember, I only do brands that do not test on animals. Thank you so very, very much to my patrons, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.